Growing up in Santa Barbara, I always knew I wasn't the favorite. My brother Daniel was the golden child, charming, athletic, always the center of attention. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one. I did my homework, helped around the house, and stayed out of trouble. But it never seemed to matter. My parents praised Daniel for every little thing. When he got a C in math, it was, he's trying his best. When I got straight A's, they barely looked up. At first, I thought I was just being sensitive. But over time, the signs became too obvious to ignore. I remember one Christmas, when I was 15, I bought Mom a necklace with my babysitting money. She smiled politely, then gushed over the scarf Daniel picked up at Target 5 minutes before dinner. That was when it really hit me. I was invisible in my own family. After high school, things didn't get any better. Daniel stayed close to home, got a job in the family business, and my parents acted like he walked on water. I, on the other hand, moved to Los Angeles for college, got my degree, landed a solid job in marketing, built a life. I called, I visited, I sent gifts on every birthday and holiday, but I always got the sense they just forgot. I was part of the picture. The turning point came when my mom passed away. It was sudden, an aneurysm. I rushed back home, heartbroken. Daniel barely acknowledged me at the hospital. My dad was cold, almost distant. During the funeral planning, I tried to help, but everything had already been arranged without me. It was like they didn't even consider that I might want to be involved. And then came the will. Dad insisted we wait a few weeks before reading it. I respected that. But when the lawyer finally gathered us, I knew something wasn't right. The tone in the room was off. Daniel looked too calm, too confident. I sat there in silence, listening as the lawyer read clause after clause. And my name? Never came up. Not once. The house, to Daniel. The savings, to Daniel. The family business, Daniel again. Even the car, my mom's old Volvo she'd promised me years ago, was gifted to him. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what I'd just heard. My father didn't even look at me. He signed the paperwork like it was just another Tuesday. My heart was pounding, but I stayed quiet. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood up, thanked the lawyer, and walked out of that office like a ghost. They thought I would disappear quietly. They had no idea who they were dealing with. For days after the will reading, I wandered around Santa Barbara in a fog. I stayed in a cheap motel near the beach because I couldn't bear to be in my childhood home, not now that it legally belonged to someone who clearly didn't want me around. I kept replaying everything in my mind, trying to find a reason, a moment, anything that would explain why I had been completely erased from my own mother's legacy. The truth was, I didn't believe she would have left me out. My mom may not have always shown it the way I needed, but we had moments. Real ones. She used to call me late at night just to hear how I was doing. She once told me she admired my independence, said I was the one who reminded her of herself when she was younger. That meant something. And I knew she wouldn't cut me off like that. Unless she didn't write that version of the will. Or worse, she never got to change it. That night I called my best friend from college, Leah. She's a paralegal now in San Diego, and she's the type who reads legal documents for fun. I told her everything. From the way Daniel acted at the hospital to how my name was completely absent in the will. She listened patiently, then said 5 words that changed everything. "You need to see a lawyer." At first I hesitated. It felt wrong, like I'd be stirring up drama just for money. But Leah pushed me to think deeper. "Amanda," she said, "this isn't about greed. It's about your rights. You're not being dramatic. You're being erased." So I made an appointment with an estate attorney the very next day. His name was Mark, and from the moment I walked into his office, I knew I'd found someone who got it. He listened, asked questions, took notes. When I handed him the copy of the will, he skimmed it carefully, then frowned. "There are irregularities," he said. The language was vague. There were no dates showing when changes were made, no witnesses listed on certain clauses. The last amendment had been added just weeks before my mom passed. And, here's the kicker, it was written in a different font. That was the first time something inside me switched. I wasn't just the forgotten daughter anymore. I was a woman who deserved answers, who deserved justice. As Mark explained the process of contesting a will, something deep and dormant inside me lit up. Maybe anger, maybe grief, maybe both. But whatever it was powerful. I'd spent my whole life keeping quiet, staying out of the way, trying not to rock the boat. But this time, I was going to raise hell. Filing the legal challenge was both terrifying and oddly satisfying. Mark explained that contesting a will wasn't easy. It meant going up against not just Daniel, but the entire image of the family I'd spent my life trying to belong to. But I was ready. I didn't care if it made things messy. Things had already been messy for years, only I had been too polite to say it out loud. The day Daniel was served with the legal notice, I got a call. Not from him, not from my dad, but from my Aunt Grace, my mom's sister. "Amanda," she said, her voice low and cautious. "I heard what's happening, and I want you to know, I always thought something was off." My heart pounded. I hadn't spoken to Aunt Grace much since the funeral. She lived up in Napa and had never been close to the family drama. Or so I thought. She told me that just a month before my mom passed, they had lunch together. Over soup and salad, my mom mentioned wanting to update her will to include me equally. "She said she was proud of you," Grace whispered. "She was planning to leave you the beach lot she inherited from your grandmother. She wanted you to have something of your own." I couldn't breathe. That property wasn't even listed in the version of the will I saw. When I told Mark about the call, he lit up. "This is huge. If your mother told someone about her intentions shortly before her death, and that part of the estate's missing, it could mean we're looking at undue influence. Or worse, fraud." It was the first time I'd heard the word fraud out loud. It made everything real. Mark began digging into the paper trail. Emails, property records, witness signatures, and the more he uncovered, the more things started to smell wrong. One witness listed in the will had died 2 years earlier. Another had no memory of signing anything related to my mother's estate. Meanwhile, my dad finally called, not to apologize, not to check on me. "Why are you doing this?" he asked flatly. "You're just making things harder for everyone." I wanted to scream. Everyone? Who was everyone, if not me? I was his daughter, too. I'd stood by my mother's hospital bed and watched her take her last breath, and now I was being treated like a stranger, crashing someone else's family reunion. But I didn't scream. I let the silence speak. "You made your choice, Amanda," he muttered before hanging up. Yes, he had. And now I was making mine. The pre-trial hearing was set for early spring, and by the time it rolled around, I was no longer the same Amanda who had quietly walked out of that lawyer's office. I was no longer a ghost floating through my family's story. I was showing up. In court, in life, and in truth. Mark had compiled a strong case. Aunt Grace agreed to provide a written statement, and we even got access to a copy of my mother's older will, one that did include me. The contrast between that and the new, shady version was jarring. But the most telling clue came from an unlikely source. My mom's email account. Thanks to a subpoena, Mark obtained archived correspondence. In an email dated just 3 weeks before her death, my mom wrote to her financial advisor, "I want Amanda to have the beach lot and at least half of my savings. We'll meet next week to go over the updates." That meeting never happened, because 3 days later she collapsed at home, and my father and Daniel took over everything. When Mark showed me the email, I sat there in silence. I could feel my chest tightening. That one sentence confirmed everything I felt in my gut, that my mother hadn't forgotten me. She hadn't chosen to leave me out. Someone else had chosen to silence her intentions. The day before court, I drove to the beach lot, my grandmother's land. I hadn't been there in years. It was quiet, peaceful, untouched. I stood there with the ocean wind in my hair, and for the first time, I let myself grieve. Not just for my mother, but for the girl I had been. The girl who kept hoping for approval. The woman who kept showing up, only to be ignored. I wasn't that woman anymore. When I walked into the courtroom the next day, Daniel looked smug. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. But I sat tall, calm. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for the truth. Our lawyer laid everything out. Timelines, discrepancies, the email, the witness statements, Aunt Grace's testimony. It was a lot to take in, and at one point I saw Daniel whisper something to my father with a look of panic on his face. That's when it hit me. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought I'd stay quiet forever. But the woman sitting in that courtroom wasn't the Amanda they once ignored. She was someone they should have never underestimated. By the second day of hearings, I noticed a shift in the room. The judge was paying close attention. My father had stopped pretending to be bored, and Daniel's confidence had turned into agitation. He kept tapping his pen against the table, jaw clenched. Something was unraveling, and I could feel it. Then came the moment that changed everything. Mark had subpoenaed the notary who supposedly signed the final version of the will. Her name was Sheila, and she appeared in court that afternoon. She was calm, professional, but confused. "I've notarized hundreds of documents," she said, "but this one? I've never seen it before." Mark showed her the signature. Her eyes narrowed. "That's not mine. Someone forged this." Gasps filled the courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward. I turned slowly toward my father. His face went pale. Daniel whispered something, but my father didn't respond. He just stared down at the table like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The judge called for a recess, and I stepped into the hallway, my heart racing. Aunt Grace joined me, holding my hand tightly. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly. "I know," I whispered, "but it hurts." And it did. Even in that moment of truth, when the lies were crumbling and the mask was slipping, part of me still wanted to cry. Not because I wasn't winning, but because I never wanted it to come to this. I didn't want to see my own father involved in something so cruel and calculating. But what choice did they leave me? When court resumed, the judge addressed the room with a weight I won't forget. "We now have compelling evidence that this will may not reflect the decedent's true intentions. I am placing a temporary hold on the estate until a formal investigation can be completed." Daniel exploded as soon as we stepped outside. "You just want money, Amanda." I didn't flinch. "No. I want what's fair, something you've never understood." My dad didn't say a word, he just walked away. For the first time, I think he realized I wasn't a little girl begging for scraps of affection anymore. I was a woman demanding justice. The court investigation took 3 long, draining months. Every week brought a new discovery: missing documents, inconsistent signatures, financial transfers that raised more questions than answers. It became clear that my father and Daniel had rushed to lock down everything after my mother's passing, hoping no one would look too closely. But someone finally did. Me. Mark kept me updated regularly, and his confidence grew with every week. "We're not just building a case," he told me. "We're exposing a pattern." When the case returned to court for the final hearings, it was no longer just about a forged will. It had become about something deeper. About the way families can silence, erase, and rewrite someone's place in their own story. The courtroom was packed on the final day. Even people I hadn't seen since childhood were there. Neighbors, old family friends. Word had spread. And while I hated the spectacle of it all, part of me was glad. Let them see. Let them know I didn't disappear. My father was forced to take the stand. I'll never forget how small he looked up there, suddenly stripped of the control he'd always wielded so easily. Mark asked him directly, "Did you alter the original will after your wife's death?" My father hesitated, then looked over at me. And for a second, I swear, I saw shame in his eyes. He cleared his throat. I didn't think Amanda needed anything. She has a good job, a life in LA. Daniel was here. He was part of the business. I just thought it made sense. But your wife didn't agree, Mark pressed. You ignored her documented intentions. Why? My father didn't answer. The silence in that room was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. Later, Daniel took the stand and tried to play innocent. He claimed he had no idea the will had been altered. But the paper trail told another story. He'd transferred assets to his name just 2 days after my mom's funeral. The same beach property she wanted me to have. He'd already applied for a construction permit on it. It was never just about grief. It was about greed. When closing arguments wrapped up, I felt exhausted, but beneath that exhaustion was something powerful. Relief. I had done the hard thing. I had spoken up, even when every part of me wanted to stay silent and small. And now it was out of my hands. All I could do was wait. But one thing was certain. No matter what the judge decided, I had reclaimed something far more valuable than land or money. I had reclaimed my voice. The judge took 2 weeks to deliver the final ruling. 2 weeks of restless nights, second-guessing, pacing around my apartment like the floor might give me answers. I kept going over everything in my head. The forged documents, the lies, the betrayal. I told myself that no matter the outcome, I had stood up for myself in a way I never had before. But still, I was scared. Then came the call from Mark. "Amanda," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "We won." I didn't say anything at first. I just sat there, my heart thudding so loudly I thought I might pass out. "Say that again?" I whispered. "You won. The judge ruled the will invalid due to fraud and undue influence. Your mother's previous will has been reinstated. You're entitled to your full share, including the beach property." I closed my eyes and let the tears fall freely, not because of the inheritance, but because I was seen. I was finally seen. Later that week, the ruling was made official. The assets were frozen pending redistribution, and Daniel was ordered to return anything he'd already transferred under the fraudulent will. That included the house, the accounts, and the land. I knew he was furious, but this time I didn't care. What surprised me the most, though, was the letter I got in the mail from my father a few days after the verdict. It wasn't an apology. It was a justification. He wrote about how hard things were after Mom died, how he panicked, how he did what he thought was best for the family. And then, at the very end, he wrote, "You were always the strong one, Amanda. I guess I just didn't want to admit that." For a second, it almost broke me again. Because that one sentence, more honest than anything he'd ever said to me before, came far too late. But I didn't respond. Some wounds deserved to scar. Instead, I drove to the beach lot. It was mine now, legally, rightfully. I stood there, barefoot in the sand, the wind wrapping around me like a hug I didn't know I needed. I looked out at the waves and thought about my mom. I think she would have been proud. Not because I fought in court, but because I didn't let myself disappear. Because I honored what she wanted even when others tried to bury it. And because, finally, I honored myself. It's been almost a year since the court ruling, and I still wake up some mornings expecting to feel like that girl who was left out of everything. But I'm not her anymore. The beach lot is now officially in my name. I haven't developed it, not yet. For now, it's a quiet place I visit when I need to remember who I am, who I've become. I planted wildflowers around the old gate, and sometimes I bring a folding chair just to sit and breathe, to listen to the ocean whisper the truth I once doubted. I matter. I always did. I haven't spoken to Daniel since the ruling. I hear things through distant relatives. He had to move out of the house, sold off part of the business, and is still bitter. I'm not angry at him anymore. He did what people like him often do, take what they believe they deserve without ever questioning whether it was earned. As for my father, he hasn't reached out again. That letter was the final thread. I keep it folded in the back of a drawer, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. Sometimes closure isn't a door swinging shut. It's you walking away and never looking back. I spent so long thinking that justice looked like revenge, that getting even would finally make me feel whole. But I was wrong. Justice, for me, was reclaiming my voice. It was standing in a courtroom and saying, "You will not erase me." It was showing the world and myself that I was worth fighting for. I used part of my share of the inheritance to start a small foundation in my mother's name. It helps young women in family legal disputes access resources and legal support. Because no one should have to face what I did alone. People still ask me if I would do it all over again, knowing how painful it was. And I always say, yes. Because the worst thing wasn't being left out of the will. It was spending years believing I didn't deserve to be included. Now I know better. I don't need their approval. I don't need their permission. I've built something stronger than a legacy. I've built my own life. And they can never take that from me again.